So instead, we are welcoming Democratic congressional candidate Gregory Whitten, who we will officially introduce in just a moment. But want to stress transparency is critical here. And that is why this conversation has been designed with input from a broad group of journalists in Arizona, representing urban and rural communities. We also want to let you know that the candidate has not been given advanced access to any of these questions. And so with that, let's introduce the Democratic congressional candidate for District 8, Gregory Whitten. Mr. Whitten, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You have 2 minutes for an opening statement. You have the floor.
My name is Greg Whitten. I'm the Democratic nominee for Arizona Congressional District 8. I'm a third-generation Arizonan. My grandfather came here when it was mainly orange groves. He started insurance business that's still in the family today. He was the one that not only told me but showed me how important public service is. He was a rock in our community. From there, I went to the Pentagon, where I cut red tape so soldiers could get access to health care. I spent my whole career being an independent voice for Arizonans, unlike my opponent, who will be a blank check for Donald Trump and Speaker Johnson. Let's be real. He's extreme. On abortion, he would ban it totally. He has said he would throw doctors and nurses in jail. He said he was a prosecutor, but he never prosecuted a case. On top of that, he will defund Social Security and Medicare because he supports those tax cuts. I'll be honest, I've worked my whole career for Arizonans. He's worked his whole career lying so that he could get elected. Thank you for having me here today.
Mr. Whitten, let's start by talking a little bit more about your district. It is one of the largest in the Valley, includes cities north and west of Phoenix, so places like Glendale, Peoria, Sun City West, and New River. A Republican has held this seat since 2013 when those boundaries were redrawn to what it is today. So why do you think constituents there are ready for a change?
Well, the district has grown. A lot of independents have come in. It's actually one of the top districts that has the most independents. On top of that, I think that when I go around and talk to constituents, they're sick of not being served by my predecessor. I think they want someone that's going to get things done for them in Washington. The most she did was pass a bill to protect gas stoves. They want to, and also on top of that, what's going to be at the top of the ballot is abortion. And honestly, my opponent says he will ban it totally, and he supports the 1864 ban on abortion. That is going to be a very important, and it's really black and white in this election. It's about democracy, it's about abortion, and me and my candidate couldn't be drastically different, and it is an open seat, so it does change the dynamic a little bit.
So what is your stance on the issue of abortion? I know you've mentioned the need to codify Roe v. Wade.
Yep.
At least as things stand now, that could prove to be difficult. So is there room for compromise? Are there other options that you foresee surrounding this issue?
I think the bottom line is that the government has no business being in a doctor's room, where it should be between a doctor, the patient, and her family, basically. So that is my stance. So we just need to get the government out of that. My opponent says he wants to put it at the state level, but he hasn't come out actually on a stance on where he's going to vote on the proposition that's at the top of the ballot. Also, 2 weeks ago, he was at a pro-life fundraiser. So he's trying to hide behind this issue, where I'm very clear it's between a woman, her doctor, and her family. And on top of that, I would also like to say, it has done damage to women's health care in general. The state of Idaho lost 22% of its OBGYNs when it passed its law. So I want to make sure my sister, my mother, anybody that needs to have care can get it.
And you've mentioned that issue on the ballot here in Arizona that citizens will vote on in November. So do you think that this is something that belongs in the state's hands?
I believe that it should be codified at the federal level so that every woman across this nation has access to health care.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit. You talked about a growth in your district. It is growing quite a bit. The Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC, that is in your district. How do you work to not only make that project a success, but to also grow this district into a leading tech hub?
So my predecessor didn't even attend the opening and did not vote for the CHIPS Act. My current opponent calls it a microchip factory and cares more about Chinese coming across the border and spying on it. I care about this. This is $4 billion invested in my district, 80,000 jobs over the next 5 years. It is important that that grows, and it's not only just for this district, it's also national security, as a lot of people know. When I'm in Congress, I will apply for the RFP from the Department of Congress for tech hubs. I want to make my district the center of chip manufacturing for the globe.
Now, TSMC has had some challenges getting up off the ground, some delays. So how do you go about ensuring the long-term success of these tens of thousands of jobs in your district?
So the bottom line is I'm endorsed by the unions. There has been a lot in the media about them negotiating with the Taiwanese. If the Taiwanese are going to take hard-earned taxpayer dollars, they need to employ Americans, and they need to employ Americans that are in my district so that they can put food on their table and have good jobs. So the bottom line is I would be in the center of that, negotiating that.
And when it comes to the growth in your district, of course, you've mentioned making sure it's sustainable. The 2024 Arizona Voters Agenda shows that 52% of voters are not confident that Arizona is prepared for future growth. So how do you balance increasing development, bringing some of these industries in, with the need to preserve and also protect our natural resources?
So I commend our governor for putting out there the water table and the 100-year water rule. We need to stick to that. That's extremely important. On top of that, I would bring money to the district for affordable housing so people have places that they can live. I also would be working, because I was an executive at a healthcare company where I grew jobs, I will be working with the private industry to make sure that they are coming and growing my district so my constituents can have those resources.
And of course, your constituents, there are many seniors in your
Yes.
district. And so issues like housing, like
Yes.
you mentioned, is very important to them. What can be done? What are some actionable steps you think to make housing more accessible and also more affordable, particularly for seniors?
Well, the bottom line is my opponent and his party has cut $4 billion of affordable housing. They don't want to solve this problem. When in Congress, I will develop bills that will grow affordable housing, also across that long-term rentals for individuals and families, and also work across the aisle to cut red tape so that we don't have the zoning and other sort of laws that are getting in the way of us growing and building houses so that people can have a roof over their head.
Yeah, I was going to mention there, affordable housing, difficult to build. It
Yeah.
can be expensive. It can be time consuming. So what sorts of, you said cutting red tape. So how do you do that? How do you go about changing the system essentially?
So essentially, when you're in Congress, you have a lot over these zoning permits and different things like that. So what I would do is try to cut those red tapes so that people that come in can actually build the affordable housing and build efficient housing so they don't have to deal with all the different barriers that get them to doing that. And on top of that, if those are cut down, the companies have less to spend, so then it's more affordable. And we have to have mixed housing as well. I don't know, I read recently, City of Glendale, for example, they're playing politics. They got the Department of the Navy to actually call the governor and stop them from actually building affordable housing. So I want to cut all that red tape, and I want to be able to have us build more houses in my district.
Social Security and Medicare, also big issues
Yes.
in your district, something you talk quite a bit about. Your opponent has said, at least publicly, on the most basic level, that you do need to preserve those programs. You've mentioned a means test for programs like
Yes.
Social Security. Can you elaborate on what that would look like and why you think that would help with this particular issue?
So my opponent has said he wants to preserve Social Security and Medicare, but he has no policies for it. All he has said is that he wouldn't tax people on the program. That, under statistics, the program will be gone in 5 to 10 years, and people are living longer. What I was trying to say about means testing was the fact that we need to find a way to make this program solvent, and also on top of that, not raise taxes. So the idea is not kicking anybody off of Social Security. It's basically saying billionaires who collect $30,000 a year, if you want to reduce some of that and put billions of dollars back into this program so people in the upper middle class and middle class are not making decisions over groceries and medication, and that the program will last and serve the people it needs to serve the most.
So you can see how there might be some pushback to that
Yeah.
idea of a means test. Are there other additional ways that you plan to approach making those programs solvent?
Well, I think we need to expand on negotiating on the top 10 drugs. We need to make those a lot more in generic so that people can afford their drugs at the end of the day. Capping insulin, $35, we need to continually do that, because I go throughout this district and I sit across tables from senior citizens, and like I said before, they're making a decision between whether we get all of our groceries or some of our groceries to afford our medication, or they're cutting pills in half, and that's just not okay to me.
Yeah, and of course, inflation has been a big issue across the country. Here in Arizona, particularly the Phoenix area, at one point had the highest rate of inflation. The Federal Reserve did recently decide to lower interest rates. But what other steps would you advocate for in order to help provide some of that relief that you're talking about?
Yeah. So my opponent supports the Trump tariffs, and what that will do is that will drive up all common goods that people have, food, gas, everything else like this, which is only going to increase inflation. What I would do is expand on the Inflation Reduction Act, like I said, negotiation on top 10 drugs so people can have money back in their pocket to be able to drive down inflations. And the last thing you mentioned before is jobs. Good jobs, not just jobs in general. So TSMC, 80,000 jobs over the next 5 years. I want to grow that industry so that people can get good jobs so they can put food on their table.
Are there other industries outside of tech that you think would be good for your district or have the opportunity to promote more job growth in your district?
Well, on the border of my district is the Cardinal Stadium. I think we need to bring a lot of those kind of tourist sort of things back to our district. They're building a lot of hotels and things like this. I don't want people, when they come to the Super Bowl, staying in Scottsdale and then coming to Glendale for the game. I want to make sure that people can have that opportunity and have those things around there. So I think that's extremely important in my district as well.
You mentioned earlier that your background is in biosecurity. What would you say is the biggest threat to our national security right now, and what would you do as a member of Congress to address that?
So I think the biggest threat to our national security right now is twofold and on two fronts. So one, unlike my opponent's party who ponies up to dictators, we need to defend Ukraine. We need the ability to be a part of a alliance in Europe and other places like that as well. I mentioned TSMC. Key to national security. Every iPhone has that chip. We need to make sure that we are countering China, and we need to make sure that they are not getting the technologies that we have so that they can, if they ever do decide to invade the South China Sea or anything like that, that we are prepared and we have the most advanced technology.
And speaking of your opponent, he has called for what he refers to as a peace through strength approach to foreign relations. How would you characterize your overall approach to international diplomacy?
I think international diplomacy, instead of the isolationist policies that they want to have, where they just want us to all sit here and do this, I look at it like we are the beacon of democracy, and we need to show that in the world. We need to be standing next to our allies that we have had for hundreds of years at this point. So I believe that we need to do it by showing that. I'm not saying we need to be the world's police or be in endless wars, but we do need to stand next to our allies and be a beacon for democracy.
So, of course, when we talk about supporting other nations, government spending comes into play. The U.S. budget currently in deficit. How would you describe your approach to federal spending, and how should the government be spending? I know your opponent has called for reining in government spending. What's your take on that?
So, like I said, most of my career has been in public service. I know how government budgets work, and I know how bureaucracy works. The bottom line is we have to tighten the pockets. We can't keep spending on all these things. When I get to Washington, I'm going to make sure that we rein in unused spending and other things like that so that we don't have to raise taxes and we have a good, efficient government. That was actually something I worked on at the Pentagon.
And when you say unused spending, can you elaborate on that, or where there might be some areas to tighten the pockets?
Unused spending, what I was saying is there's a lot of problems when programs are allotted a certain amount of money, and then over time, because our Congress can't get a budget passed every year, that we do a CR, right? And so when those programs have to grow, they can't grow. So then there's spending that is there that needs to go back into the programs that need it the most and the policies that need it the most. And what we need to do is we need to start passing a budget every single year. And that's going to be my goal to try to do that when I get to Washington, because constituents need that from their government.
One of the other big issues, again, not just across the country, but here in Arizona, is immigration. When it comes to immigration policy, I know that you have said that this is a national crisis. You said that more needs to be done. So if elected, what specific steps would you take to improve the current situation at our border?
Well, the bottom line is we had one of the most comprehensive border legislation that was sponsored by one of the most conservative senators. We had it. My opponent and his party are playing politics with the border. They canceled it so they could try to get elected by saying it has been far too long that Arizonans have the border politicized. I want to go to Washington. I want to start with that framework and expand on that so that we can have the border secure at the end of the day. Because I don't want politicians from other parties and everywhere else coming to our border to just politicize it. We need a solution now.
Now, that piece of bipartisan legislation that you referred to, some on the other side may argue that it was flawed, that it was too late. Do you think that action should have been taken sooner, before that bill came to the table?
I am a big criticizing of the Biden administration and how they sat on this issue. It shouldn't have been done in an election year. It should have been done on day one, and that's what I would have pushed for, even though it's my own party.
Now, Arizonans will vote on the Secure the Border Act coming up in November. It gives local police officers, state judges more power when it comes to immigration. Do you think that this type of enforcement should be at a state level, or should this stay at the federal level?
It needs to stay at the federal level. We do not want any profiling. Those agencies and the people that are doing that are not prepared to do those things. We need to leave it at DOJ and DHS at the end of the day, who are trained and to be able to do that. And I want to expand those budgets so they have the technology and the resources to do the job to secure the border.
So when you talk about expanding budgets, giving more resources to Border Patrol, to the border, where does that funding come from?
Well, unlike my opponent who supports billions of dollars of tax cuts for corporations and billionaires, I would actually say we're not going to cut those taxes. That's where we're going to find. I'm not going to raise taxes on the middle class for this. It's going to come from that.
Okay. Now, throughout your campaign, you have talked a lot about collaboration, putting people over partisan politics. How can you do that, especially in this current political climate that feels so divisive?
Well, the bottom line is like, unlike my opponent, I look at myself as, when you get elected, you work for the taxpayers, you work for your constituents. I don't represent a party, I represent across the board everyone in my district. So I will reach across the aisle and try to work with them and try to work with Republicans and Democrats. I don't think one party is right on either side. For example, there are extremely right people in the Republican Party. There's extremely left people in the Democratic Party that are elected. I want to be in the middle, and I want to make sure that I'm reaching across both aisles and getting things done for my constituents, not my party or not a future president.
And not just that relationship with other folks in the legislature, but also, or in Congress, but also with your constituents. So how do you ensure that all of your constituents' voices are heard and taken into account, even those who don't agree with your viewpoint?
Well, unlike my opponent who is not here today to face these general mainstream questions, the bottom line is that I don't live in an echo chamber like he does, where he only listens to MAGA. At the end of the day, I'm going to listen to Republicans, I'm going to listen to Democrats, I'm going to listen to independents. And if you have an issue that you want me to address, I will address that. So unlike him who likes to sit in safe spaces, I'm willing to go out there and actually talk to the people.
And you have mentioned your opponent's ties to President Trump. So I'm curious, when it comes to your party's presidential candidate, how do you align with Vice President Kamala Harris's platform?
I think I've pointed out a lot of things that I align with. The bottom line is trying to get common sense solutions to issues that are important to my district, like Medicare, negotiation on top 10 drugs, like the CHIPS Act, that are going to grow jobs. I am for any candidate that is at the top that is going to be able to bring resources to my district.
And speaking of issues that are important, education, also incredibly important here in Arizona. When it comes to public education, unfortunately, Arizona just ranked last in a new study by Consumer Affairs. So what would you do to help change that?
I think at the end of the day, the voucher program is at the state level, but you can tie things to grants that come out of the Department of Education. And what I would do is I would say that I can't be going to voucher programs. I can't go because all of those programs just create more inequality across the board with our students. I think it's ridiculous that public schools have to buy advertisement now to try to get them. I want to grow our public schools. I want to make us one of the top states for that, and I'm going to work with the Department of Education to do that.
Now, you have worked with the federal government with your background in biosecurity, but never held elected office. So what do you think uniquely positions you with your background to take this next step?
Well, like I said, I was a public servant, so at the end of the day, I'm looking out for the taxpayers. I think that's something that hasn't been done on either sides of the party, of both parties. I think we need to get back to that. On top of that, I was an executive in healthcare, so I know how to grow jobs, I know how to create jobs. I also know how to navigate private markets. So I think I have a good blend of both to be able to get to Washington and understand and know what to do, because I'm going to hit the ground running on day one.
So on day one, if elected, what would your top priority be, very first thing that you'd want to do?
The very first thing that I would do is start looking at the CHIPS Act and the ability to be able to expand that and grow jobs in my district. I think that's the number one thing that I would do at this point, along with also, solving up Social Security and Medicare. That's what I want to do on day one.
Okay. Now, both you and your opponent are passionate about helping veterans, something
Yes.
that you seem to kind of agree a bit on, and their families as well.
Yeah.
So, if elected, what is the first thing you'll do to help better support those who have served our country and their families?
Well, again, my opponent and his party say that they're for veterans, but if you look at the past, they're trying to cut or have threatened to cut veterans programs. So they really don't stand in allegiance. They're just saying these things to get elected. What I would do, I've worked deeply with the VA already, cutting red tape when I was in the government to be able to get access to health care for soldiers. First things that I would do, one, I would expand technology for rural healthcare because a lot of veterans don't live within a 100-mile radius of a VA so they can get good access to healthcare. The second thing I would do is I would expand the suicide prevention to newly retired soldiers because right now you have to wait until you're actually in the VA to get those services, and we all know there's a lot of men and women that come out that have PTSD, and it's just sad that they can't have those services right away so we can save lives. Lastly, I would push the Phoenix VA to shore up its electronic health record, something I know very well because right now there's a lot of redundancies, there's a lot of wait times, and that's just not okay for the veterans in my district.
And you mentioned mental health care there for a moment. Of course, that is a crisis, not just here in Arizona, but across the country for seniors and also young people. Do you think more needs to be done to address the mental health challenges that so many Americans and Arizonans are facing?
So this is something that touched me very closely. My mother suffered from mental health care, and she recently passed away because of opioids. So this is something that is near and dear to my heart and something that I want to go to Washington and I want to solve this program. People need to, at all levels of financing, have access to mental health care, and it needs to be good mental health care. For too long, governments and states have been, contracting this out to organizations that aren't caring about their patients. So I want to make sure we shore up funding so that we are able to have everybody have access to mental health care.
You talked about when you announced your campaign, Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, of course, was in this seat. You announced that on October 3rd, and then on October 17th, she announced that she was retiring from Congress.
Yes.
So how, if at all, did that change your approach to this campaign or your approach to running for this position?
It really didn't change much. At the end of the day, I wanted to serve constituents and I want to serve the taxpayers. So it didn't really change my outlook. Honestly, when I first ran, Debbie did not go to public forums like this. For example, my opponent is not here today. She would only take interviews with questions ahead of time. I have a very good feeling that probably Abe Hamadeh is going to do the same thing, where I'm going to get out there, I'm going to answer the tough questions, and I'm going to represent my constituents. And that's why I got in this at the first place.
And we want to make sure we get to at least a couple more questions because our time is going fast. When it comes to elections, your opponent has said that Arizona's elections are not secure. What is your take on the integrity of our election system?
Arizona's elections are secure. We have some of the most safety guards that we ever have. The bottom line is my opponent sued, I think, the Arizona government 5 times. He's not going to accept an election if they don't win. Did you see him talking about the primary election as rigged? No. If they win, they want to play politics with the election system. The bottom line is elections are secure, and I believe that.
And I want to make sure we touch on climate as well. I know that's something that you talk quite a bit about. Of course, timely, given that we're finally getting a little bit of relief
nice.
from what has now officially been the hottest Phoenix summer on record. So what is your stance when it comes to climate change, and what do you think is the federal government's role in helping to mitigate some of the challenges associated with that?
So the bottom line is the Green New Deal is not a perfect deal at the end of the day, but we do need to do something. We need to do something while at the same time do not collapse industries at the end of the day. We need to work with these industries to be able to start moving over to green technology. Something that is huge in the state is water. People are very concerned by that. At the federal level, I will work just like Senator Sinema and Senator Kelly has with the 7-state treaty to be able to make sure that the Colorado River Basin is able to fill our things. Also, on top of that, I don't want to get rid of the lettuce industry, but there is no way that Saudi Arabia and all these other countries can come in here, buy land, have private wells, and grow alfalfa, which is one of the most water receptive crops out there. So I would try to get a handle on that as well.
We have about 1 minute left. And so, Arizonans, of course, we pay higher than average electric bills. That's tied to climate, of course, especially this time of year. So what, if anything, can be done to help bring down those energy costs, which would undoubtedly provide relief for so many Arizonans?
I think it's a program that now is flawed because of at the local level. I think we need to push solar. I think the idea of having solar panels on your roof and getting tax breaks around those things, I think we need to start thinking about that because that will drastically drive down, costs for people on their everyday bills. I mean, we're the Valley of the Sun. We might as well use it.
All right. Well, it is now time for closing statements. And so, Mr. Whitten, you have 1 minute.
Thank you so much. So as you can see, I am here today. The bottom line is Abe Hamadeh is a liar. He's going to lie to get elected, unlike me, who is going to work for every constituent in that district to make sure that your voices are heard. He will ban abortion, he will get rid of Social Security, and he has no plans. I have a plan for your future, so I hope that you vote for me in November. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, that is all the time we have for our one-on-one conversation with Gregory Whitten, Democratic candidate for Congressional District 8. Now, just as a reminder, Arizona's general election is on Tuesday, November 5th, and early voting starts Wednesday, October 9th. You can head to azmedia.org to see a full list of our upcoming debates, also where you can find them on TV, radio, and digital platforms provided by our local media partners. For the full debate schedule, and also if you would like to take part and submit questions for some of our future debates, just head to azcleanelections.gov. On behalf of our partners at Clean Elections, the Arizona Media Association, Reister, and also Bitfire Studios, thank you for joining us.